This conference will now be recorded.
The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all the attendees later today. And throughout the presentation, if attendees have their audio and cameras off, and as well, if you have a question throughout the presentation, please feel free to type it in the chat bubble that you see in the top right corner of your screen. After the presentations, we'll have hopefully about 15 minutes or so left for Q&A for everyone. And either myself or Kristen, who's also with Sustainable Energy Fund, will address the questions in the chat at that time. And if you have any questions for any of the speakers after the presentation's over, you can reach out to us as well, and we can connect you with the speakers as well. And so to that end, I'd like to introduce our speakers. I will be discussing an overview of Pennsylvania's CPACE program, what it is and how it could be used for Delaware County. Rachel Davis is from Petros PACE Financial, and she'll be delving into the project financing details. Rachel Davis is a Senior Vice President of Sales for Petros PACE Finance. Rachel's based in Houston and oversees all business development and marketing activities, and is responsible for growing the originations team. And our last speaker is Bob McGreevey. He's owner and president of EffectivEnergy Solutions, and he will be discussing the technical aspects of CPACE and how they can benefit the property owner. Bob is a registered professional engineer with 40 years of experience in engineering and design energy efficient HVAC solutions for commercial facilities. And Bob's team has worked on CPACE energy conservation feasibility studies for several projects in the area. So with that, I will start sharing my screen. There we go. Why are you not slideshow? Okay, and everyone, my computer has a little bit froze on me. So I'm going to close some things out.
Kelly, if you need, I can also share your slides.
Okay. Well, let's see if it wants to unfreeze. Perhaps maybe do that.
Okay.
Okay. I will stop sharing.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Okay. Kristen, you can go right to the next slide. Okay. Well, as I was saying, I'm with Sustainable Energy Fund, and we are a nonprofit that works to remove barriers to sustainable energy. We felt that CPACE was aligned with our mission of advancing renewable energy and energy efficiency and making it more accessible to the public. So it went well with all our programs, which do include financing, energy financing, education, and special projects. We try new programs out year to year, and CPACE was one of our special projects, which is now part of our programming. Next slide. So what is CPACE? It's an innovative financing instrument that is tied to the property, and it provides long-term financing for energy and water conservation measures. It's different from standard financing because it is tied to the tax of the property. A CPACE payment is collected just like our taxes are collected, and in the event of a delinquency, it's going to be collected in the same manner. The property increases value because the operating income of the property goes down. As a CPACE administrator, we are looking to make sure the guidelines are being met. Projects must meet the requirements listed in the CPACE legislation as well as the guidelines for Pennsylvania. And it has to result in energy and energy savings and reduction in water use. And as I mentioned, the CPACE payment is collected through a special assessment. Here in Pennsylvania, the word assessment has a sort of specific meaning and connotation, which makes it a little confusing. In Pennsylvania, we think of it as an assessment on the property, which may increase the value of the property and increase the taxes. But CPACE is just a separate payment. Nationwide, they use the term assessment that is collected in the same manner as taxes. It stays with the property in the event of a sale, and the future owner would take on the payment. Any other payments due within that year of the sale could also be negotiated between the buyer and seller. Next slide. Nationwide, CPACE is over a $2 billion industry, and you can see it's increased tremendously over the last several years. In 2018 was when the legislation passed in Pennsylvania. There was a lengthy stakeholder process to get the guidelines and legal documents nailed down. The first project completed was in July of 2020 in Philadelphia. And as of today, August 2021, a year later, over $40 million has been invested in Pennsylvania CPACE alone. 30 states have enacted CPACE, including a lot of our neighboring states. Next slide. So why CPACE? It covers the hard and soft costs. The terms can be long. They extend to the useful life of the equipment. And standard financing usually goes, 5 to 7 years or so. So this is a nice option to extend and lower the payment. It replaces mezzanine debt, so property owners can preserve their capital and have their options of the money going further with CPACE. In some cases, it could address the split energy usage. Next slide. So here in this map, we have, I believe, to date, 17 counties on board in green. Including Philadelphia. Philadelphia is administered by the Philadelphia Energy Authority. And so far, Sustainable Energy Fund administers the programs for the other counties in green. If you have a project or know of someone who might be interested, please reach out. We are tasked with getting the counties on board and activating programs, and of course have found that counties are more motivated when there is an active project in the pipeline. Next slide. Some of the ways that CPACE can benefit counties. Local investment creates jobs, modernizes building stock. Next slide. Okay, so how CPACE works. I apologize because some of these graphics are a little hard to read. It is generally a property owner over there on the left of the slide, you can see. A property owner is going to work with an engineer to develop a project and find a capital provider for lending. They're going to submit a pre-application, and at that phase, we make sure that the project just meets the statute requirements, as well as that there's no lien or outstanding taxes due on the property. And at that point, we work with the county on that and get things rolling. Once we are giving the go-ahead and it's approved, they can develop that project and decide on decide and design what they are going to use to implement and achieve the energy and water conservation measures. And for the final application is a little bit more detailed. We're going to need an energy analysis that is going to confirm the estimated savings, the useful life, and overall cost of the project. It's during this phase that we're going to make sure we have lender consent. A project won't move forward without lender consent. And this is due to the first year or first assessment is going to be senior to the mortgage that year. It does not accelerate. Any future payments will stay with the property, but that year will be senior and it will be collected with the property taxes. And the banks want to know what they're investing in and what the value is. The upgrades in CPACE can often increase the value of the property. Other items in this phase of the process, the final application, are administrative, such as title search, insurance, contractor requirements are also necessary. As a program administrator, we're here to support and work with the project to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Once the project has been reviewed and approved, financing closes, and then there's a contractual document that's recorded with the title of the property, and that's the statement of levy and lien. It's basically a four-party agreement signed by the county, the program administrator, property owners, and the capital provider. And that provides all the details of the assessment, such as when it's due, what the cost is yearly, and release indemnification liabilities, similar to other closings and legal contracts. Finally, the funds are dispersed and the program administrator will make sure the county knows when these are billed out. And the county bills the property owners for the CPACE payment. Next slide. This is a construction capital stack. It's a great visual graphic to see how CPACE can be used to reduce your overall average cost of debt. But I guess I'll kind of breeze through that slide. So if you want to go next, Kristen, and I'll let Rachel kind of cover some of that. How CPACE is used. It's widely used, as you can see in the blue, for energy efficiency upgrades. Here in Pennsylvania, we've had one solar project in Philadelphia, which is and then the resilient, other states have resiliency, which is that light gray area at the 7%. We do not. It is part of an expansion package that is in front of legislation right now. And let's see, commercial, you'll see on the right the listing of types of properties that can use CPACE, commercial and agriculture, and right now, no multifamily and no municipalities. Often the bond market is better for them. Multifamily is also part of that expansion package I mentioned. And Pennsylvania is one of the only states that does not allow multifamily. Next slide. So this is an example of Sora West that closed in Montgomery County. It was a new construction gut rehab, very exciting building. It was a 2-parcel complex with 127 hotel room, restaurant, rooftop lounge, plaza, and a restored fire station. And then next slide. The second project here is the Commodore, which is in Northampton County, and that was also a new construction gut rehab. It was a mixed-use redevelopment project located in Easton, and this building also contained office, retail, and restaurant space. It was a mixed use we had, and the residential portion had to be pulled out for the CPACE financing. Next slide. So some of the eligible improvements, which I know Bob will also go into detail with, energy efficient equipment and installation, renewable energy systems and energy storage, water conservation fixtures, and projects can include hard and soft and ancillary costs, such as a roof replacement to hold solar PV. And there are, if you want to go to the next slide, Kristen, there are some different requirements depending if it's new construction or retrofit. So for new construction, according to the guidelines, new construction needs to follow and utilize building and equipment standards that are outlined in this slide. All water, energy measures must demonstrate a whole building, demonstrate in whole building summary performance is 10% or more above minimum code baseline, is financeable through CPACE. And then there is an option for retroactive financing with a 2-year look back period. Next slide. Oh, that's the end. I believe one slide somehow got skipped, but I know that Bob is going over the same things. So thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. Went rather fast on some of their smaller text slides. So go ahead, Rachel, you're up.
All right, thanks, Kelly. You guys can hear me okay, right? Okay, great. All right, thanks, appreciate that, Kristen. So yeah, so Petros PACE Finance, if you don't mind just fast forwarding to the next slide here. Perfect, thanks. So we are a national CPACE capital provider. So we are the folks providing the capital into the CPACE projects that Kelly just introduced. So we are headquartered out of Austin, Texas, but have a team that is spread geographically across the country. We've been working in the PACE space for the last, call it 5 to 10 years, either funding or building up the platform for PACE, and we work on projects across the country. We've done projects in California to New York to Florida and a lot of jurisdictions in between across all asset types, and really from 500,000 all the way up. We don't have an upward cap in terms of project sizes that we can fund. So a really robust platform of capital to put into efficiency and resiliency projects in different locations. Next slide, please. All right, you went over most of this, Kelly, so I can kind of breeze through this slide, but as Kelly mentioned, in Delaware County, you guys can utilize PACE financing on new construction, retrofits, and rehabs, as well as once projects are complete, to refinance up to 2 years post-completion. So we can talk about this a little bit further on, but that's over the last, call it 12 to 18 months. This has been a huge portion of PACE projects across the country that have transacted, have taken advantage of this refinancing mechanism. So we'll get back to that in just a little bit, but go ahead, next slide. All right, so what I wanted to kind of give you guys an idea of, Kelly gave a great overview of what PACE is and kind of how SEF plays the PACE administrator role for the program. So I wanted to give you guys an idea of what Petros as the lender does in the transaction. And so really you can kind of think of your lender as a little bit of the quarterback in the transaction. So we will work with you from the very beginning stages of your project. As soon as you know what you're looking to do generally and that you're looking for alternative methods of financing, then you would reach out to us and we could start looking at your project to figure out what would qualify, what amount of lending, or borrowing capacity you would have as it pertains to PACE. And so we would work with you from the initial underwriting, generating a term sheet. Once you have that, you would take that to your internal parties, whether it's equity, whether it's your debt partners that you're working with, or just your ownership management groups that you would have to vet this with. Once the term sheet is signed, we would then assign a deal team that helps work through the entire underwriting package, and as well as the application submittals through SEF, working with folks like Bob that would put together the energy audit scope. We could help kind of coordinate that entire process. working all the way through ultimate closing and funding of the transaction. In a lot of states, we also have the ability to bill and collect the PACE assessment. It just depends on how the local municipality has opted to have that handled. As Kelly mentioned, in Pennsylvania, you guys will be billed directly from the county. So that's not a role we would serve there in Delaware County. So next slide. All right, Kelly, you touched on a lot of this as well. But really, why PACE was invented in the first place, right, is that we wanted to have a mechanism by which folks that own real estate could have an incentive to improve their asset, as well as have an efficient way of paying for that. So one of the things Kelly mentioned was the split incentive. And so if you own an office building, but your tenants bear the responsibility of contracting for their electricity and paying that, sometimes there's a disconnect in terms of, as the owner, why would I want to spend a lot of money to upgrade the building when I don't see the direct benefit of that? The tenant does, but the tenant isn't paying for the improvements that I would be making. So they call that the split incentive. So really, by having PACE repaid as an assessment, that has it such that it can be treated as property tax assessment that could potentially be passed through and recovered via triple net lease structures if it's allowed in the lease structures. That is one of the main reasons that PACE was invented, was so that folks could have that way to make sure that you're incentivized to make the improvements. The right folks that are getting the benefit could potentially help repay for that. Plus, it runs with the property, transfers upon sale automatically. Doesn't accelerate, should be 100% financing of the hard and soft cost associated with the project. So you should not have to come out of pocket for an upfront deposit. All of this should be zero out of pocket. And the intent is that the savings generated by the PACE projects that you're putting on would be such that it would help to reduce your OpEx. And therefore, it's going to increase your NOI that you're generating off of your asset, and thereby translates into a higher building value, collateral value. And so again, fixed rate financing terms can go up to 30 years. We'll line up to match the measures that we're actually funding. And I think that's pretty much in a nutshell why we're looking at PACE. Next slide, please. I won't dive into this. I know that the slides will be available after the presentation, but wanted to give you guys an idea of kind of what we look at from a capital provider standpoint when we're looking at a transaction. So the way that it's typically structured, a few things I would point out here is that, you know, again, typically a 15 to 30 year amortization for the assessment can be across all geographies where a PACE program has been adopted and a resolution has been passed by the local municipality. And one of the other guidelines is, I would say, it's typically up to about 25% of the as stabilized value of the property would be the upper limit on the amount of PACE that can be borrowed for a specific project. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is a busy slide. There's a lot going on here. And again, this is a resource for you guys to look at after the presentation, but really, in a nutshell, what this is telling you is, why would someone, say you're a developer and you're about to build a new hotel, why would you want to look at PACE as an alternative to what you would typically do? And so what this slide is showing you is that you can look at equity, you can look at MEZ, and then you can look at plugging in CPACE to displace either equity or MEZ, or potentially a portion of both. But ultimately, by bringing PACE in, longer term, lower cost of capital, that lowers your weighted average cost of capital on the entire project, as well as increasing your developer returns on that project. So you're building efficiently, you're putting in sustainable measures, right? And so this is a way to carve those out of your total development budget and say, okay, you know, I have a $100 million project I'm building. 25 million of that would fall into the energy efficiency, water efficiency, renewable component. I'm going to take those measures, fund that with CPACE, and that should take away the higher cost mezz, you know, if you're talking 12% or more that you'd be using for something in that realm, PACE is way more cost effective. All right, next slide, please. All right, so back to the retroactivity. So PACE can come in at the time that you're constructing the renovation or retrofit on your existing property. It can come in at the time that you are closing with your construction loan on a new construction project or a gut renovation, but it could also come in once you've completed it. So a lot of times counties haven't yet opted into the program. And so as a developer, you've been going through your building, it meets the requirements necessary for PACE in terms of the efficiency requirements. This is a way for you to go in after completion and refinance out the higher cost mezzanine, potentially a prep equity piece that you had in there, or potentially if you were going out for a hard money loan for your initial construction loan, which would make your construction financing more expensive, then you could displace some of that or use PACE to pay that down. And so we had a lot of folks during kind of the aftermath of COVID, and unfortunately we're still seeing some of this, right? But folks that were coming out, they were completing their projects, but yet say you're a hotel, right? There weren't a lot of guests, call it between March and June of last year. And so those folks were able to refinance out the debt that they had there, potentially use PACE to modify one of their existing construction loan agreements. And then with PACE, you can capitalize up to 2 years of interest. So that gave them kind of a 2-year runway to build up some operating reserves, as well as, you know, just getting occupancy levels back up so that they could actually service the PACE assessment. So we see a ton of this. You know, again, you can fund cost overruns with it retroactively, service existing debt, or replenish your operating reserves on the property. So definitely something to keep in mind if you think it may fit the need for your project. Next slide, please. All right, and one of the other items Kelly mentioned briefly, and happy to answer any questions that may come up after this, is PACE assessments do take the same priority as other property taxes and assessments. And so what that means is that because of that, we require any existing mortgage holders or planned mortgage holders to consent to having PACE in the capital stack with them. And so it's typically a very short 2-3 page document, just with them acknowledging where PACE sits in the stack. But again, one of the most important things to point out is this very first item here is that because PACE is not accelerating under any circumstance whatsoever, it is only what is unpaid that is actually ever ahead of any other mortgage holders. We can never call everything or have some sort of a balloon payment that would come due for the PACE assessment. Just like other property taxes upon sale, it's going to just continue for the next 25, 30 years. So doesn't affect the lender's rights, remedies, ability to cure, but it is only the 1 year's assessment that's ever in front of them. So that's the biggest piece to point out to them. And it should increase their collateral value, right? If it's a stabilized asset and you're coming in to replace a chiller system, it should reduce OpEx, increase NOI, higher collateral value. All of that should be there for them. All right, next slide. And just wanted to give you kind of an idea of some of the different types of projects that we've worked with and could fit a need. These are some that we've worked on in other jurisdictions. This is one of our most recent projects that we closed. It was an $89 million CPACE assessment for a large renovation of an office building in Manhattan. So this helped launch the New York CPACE program. And so we were really excited by this one, set a couple of records within the PACE world. But one of the things is I wanted to show you guys that it really goes across a lot of different asset classes, and it can be used on a very large scale. It can be used on a small scale. It can come in retrofit, it can come in new construction, and it can come in to refinance. So there's a lot of different uses for it. So just keep that in mind. And one of the items that you'll see a lot of consistency, and I know Bob is going to dive into this a little bit more here in just a minute, but a lot of the measures that we fund are very similar across projects. So I like to say it's going to typically be your mechanical, electrical, your plumbing, building envelope. Those measures are some of the ones that we see consistently across projects, with a few little nuances here and there, where this one had elevators that were included as well. So next slide, please. Here is a mixed use portfolio opportunity that we closed a couple of years ago. We do see quite a bit in mixed use as well. Oops. That one was in Nebraska. And again, they had a hotel, they had a retail center, as well as an apartment complex that was funded with PACE. And so they used about 25 million, again, to fund those similar mechanical, electrical improvements. And then we had one more, but that's okay. It's pretty similar to the others. I think it was a hotel that we did in California not too long ago. So happy to answer any questions. Just know that there's a lot of applicability for CPACE, and any of us here on the phone are happy to address questions as they come up.
So sorry, Rachel, just letting you know, I do have your slides up right now. For some reason, my screen is paused and it won't allow me to share them. So I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. I'm going to start sharing again, see if that helps.
Okay. We'll toss it over to you then, Bob. Your turn.
You got it. Well, I want to thank Kelly and Rachel both, okay, for the great presentations they've made and how CPACE works, and also how it's financed. And it's really been a blessing, okay, for those interested in energy field, because if you think about it, with $2 billion out there meeting unmet needs before, you know, that's like 2,000 $1 million projects that we love. And my hat's off to everybody involved in it, you know, from all phases of that. And we're going to talk about the engineering part of it. And you may recognize the Chester County Courthouse behind, Delaware County Courthouse right behind there. And I've been involved in a lot of retrofits in there too, but we've got a lot of miles to go. Next slide. About Effective, well, a little bit about myself first. I've been in the business, like it said, for 40 years. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's not a good thing, but you know, we'll consider it that way this time. And I've been in work for Train, work for York, in Philadelphia, Atlanta, Miami. Started my career really with Hartsfield Airport and got into energy economics. And that just carried on. And when I had a mechanical contracting company to chase down BTUs and electrons, as well as a consulting firm now. So while we are an energy efficiency company, and we do develop master energy plans and even net zero energy projects, okay, we're a mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineer as well. And so with that, we can go to the next page. This is some of the services that we provide, as you would expect from an energy efficiency firm. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but one thing that is important now is indoor air quality. It has a lot to do, it's intermixed with energy. We'll talk about that a little bit more. One of the things too, for these larger facilities, you want to look at a master energy plan. You know, not only the energy reduction measures, but also what renewable energy alternatives would be available after you have slimmed down that building and saved as much energy as you possibly can. So we'll talk about that more also. Next slide. Okay, now here's the technical part of CPACE, if you would. It's really the fun part, but some would argue with that. Next slide. Okay, as far as eligibility is concerned, you can you can finance with PACE, CPACE, a lot or a little, as you can see with some of the case studies, that Rachel was talking about. Those are some huge facilities, but it can be for a small upgrade as well. And one of the things is talking about the capital providers, and is that one of the things that this addresses, which also Rachel talked about, but is the triple net lease versus what we would call triple value lease. In other words, and most of the buildings you're probably in right now, the energy bills paid by you and the improvements paid by the owner. That really helps this, what I considered a hole in the overall national energy plan, and it really helps us to include more people to save more energy for and to get the financing. And then you have like the shared incentive for both the owner and the tenant. Next one. Oh, I should point out there that you need, of course, a professional engineer to be the engineer of record for both the initial study, the energy modeling, and the engineering of the energy conservation measures. And then on new construction, you need also, inspections as time moves along, so that we're ensuring the CPACE program that we are doing what we said we would, and that we're saving the energy that we said we would. Next slide. So you've heard from the program administrator, you've heard from the capital provider, and Kelly and Rachel, and what we are providing in the ways of services for this program is that we make sure that it meets and exceeds the qualifications that not only that CPACE puts out, which they've got a very nice guideline for when we do the energy modeling, but also they refer to the International Energy Efficiency Code, which goes back to the International Mechanical Code, which goes back to the International Building Code. So as in any significant project, particularly where there is additional financing provided, there's a lot of checks and measures when it comes to saving energy. Next slide. As far as you can see, once again, this is kind of like the last slide, but the program administrator is going to help you develop the project, arrange the financing, have the pre-application, and then we come in and not do you only select the energy conservation measure, but you really have to model the building so that you know what's happening inside of the building. You can see it, okay, through your examination of how the building is equipped with equipment, and like was talked about before, the building envelope, the roof, all of that when we're talking about existing projects, existing building projects, which most of these are. And then, then your financier, as Rachel pointed out, would help you with the financial application and the very important financing that is going on and what are the requirements of getting financed. Next slide. So let's take a look at, let's go down the rabbit hole a little bit and take a look at what energy conservation measures that might fit for your building and some other ones as well. Next slide. So also, energy conservation measure is a general term which talks about how are you going to save energy with a particular project, and how are you going to define it, how much energy are you going to save, and is it viable? And so CPACE gives us even a better definition, I think, in that it expands the different opportunities that you have in alternative energy systems and renewable energy improvements, and as more and more important every day, water conservation projects. Next slide. Okay, I won't go through all of these, but you can see that there is, like I said before, checks and balances that go from and that are specific to each state, that are national and from the federal government. But one thing that it really boils down to is that are we saving 20% of the, what is the energy consumption right now? Are we saving 20% with this individual energy conservation measure? And one of the things I would have to say there is that you have to make sure that when you are doing more than one energy conservation measure, that the effects that it has on the other energy conservation measures is very important when you're putting the models together. An example I give would be you take the room that you're setting in. If we came in and changed the light bulbs from T12s to LEDs, that would save half the energy. If we put in a motion sensor, that would save half the energy. If you added those two together, then it's going to be we saved all of the energy of any lights, which is not the case. So it's synergistic, and the modeling is very important because CPACE does understand the synergy effect of one ECM over another. Next slide. Okay, here's some example, and what I'm saying, what I have seen and what we tell customers is that lighting always leads the way. If you take the 4-foot light bulb that you're probably looking up at right now, just 2 years ago, an LED bulb would have been $40, and now it's about $4, and it lasts much longer, and it's not only less expensive, but it's brighter, and it saves much more energy, and it's long lasting. So for all those reasons, that's a great one to start with. It helps with other ECMs. The one that most people think about first is more efficient equipment, and that certainly is a most important item, and it needs to be examined closely. It does cost more, usually in dollars per kWh saved. So, but blended together, it still has a real good opportunity for CPACE. What I love about heat recovery systems, and this is where let's say an industry or even the exhaust fans may be pulling heat out of the building, and but some of that energy can be saved and reused again. So that could be an industrial water-to-water heat pump, or it could be an energy recovery unit. But really, instead of improving efficiency, you're really talking about using the BTU twice. And then you have variable speed drives that go on pumps and fans and compressors. And I'm sure that all of you know the infinity laws, which that if you reduce the speed of a pump or a fan with a variable speed drive to 50%, that the energy consumption goes down to 12.5%. Holy mackerel. That's why variable speed drives, which for many other reasons, are an excellent energy conservation measures. Okay, as we do the energy conservation measures that are good for that building, that's excellent because it reduces the higher costs of renewable energy programs and renewable energy costs, so that you can reduce the cost of that plant, would you say? And that would be like you can reduce the size of your solar voltaic array. You reduce the size of your wind power or fuel cell. I have to say that I think that solar photovoltaic power is the one that is it's easier to engineer, easier to get approved, and the one that saves the most energy without any environmental impacts to speak of. And wind is mostly for much larger projects. I've never had one really pan out that's not a huge project. And fuel cells is another method. I will call that batteries also. Batteries have becoming more and more of a help of making the whole energy grid less expensive to use and more reliable. And then you have water conservation measures, as easy as changing a fountain head, in the bathrooms, or set up the toilets differently. There's many ways you can do it. You might think that one flush doesn't make a difference, but 1,000 will certainly make a big difference. And there's many other ECMs which we'll talk about more also in an individual case we're going to look at. Next slide. Okay. If you look at the ECMs that are possibilities for the survey, you know, we've talked about them, but here's what you go through each one. Number one, project description. This is a 10 horsepower variable speed drive, and it is going to cost this much, and it's going to save this much energy. Then you have a baseline that you're going to provide, which is how the building is operating now. That is very important because without a good foundation and understanding of how the energy flows through the building, it's very difficult to get an accurate energy conservation measure that you can take to the bank. So that's very important. Then you have to add them all the capital costs up. And of course, like we talked about, you have to be aware of the synergistic effects, which usually are not a sum total of all of the ECMs. So baseline savings, deliverable requirements, you have to describe what you're providing, and you have to put a engineering model together that can pass muster. Next slide. Okay, so you have an ECM survey report. Okay, you want a written narrative, a good descriptive, doesn't have to be, you know, a white paper, but it's just a good description that anybody can understand. A written narrative description of the proposed ECMs, and also a table that simply has the cost, the energy savings, and you know, by kWh, and then by, you know, what kW does it reduce, and then what kind of money are you saving. And there's plenty of ways to model out there. Some of the ones that CPACE does allow for is the Train Trace program, and some other programs that that are available from the government, you know, for no cost. So then you also include the utility bills, at least 2 years, and then you have cut sheets on the equipment, and sometimes drawings and specifications. All of these things can be financed as well and included in the cost of the project. Next slide. All right, we're going to take a sample, a case study here of a project that we did, and because there is just the typical ECMs should be looked at and drilled down on harder, and some things that you might pass, you know, by and walk by. Some of them are actually energy conservation measures that are really important, particularly like the envelope of a building, the windows that are in it, transformers that you never thought that used up too much energy were walked by. So these things are very important, and also ones that can include even the envelope of the building or the roof of the building can be included in the CPACE financing. Next is variable speed drives, and as we talked about, there is the equations that are not intuitive about how much energy you're going to save. And it used to be that variable speed drives were much more expensive and less reliable than starters. The opposite is true now. They approach the reliability of starters, and they're competitive in cost, and they provide many other benefits to your project. Indoor air quality. So, okay, Bob, why do you have this in a CPACE project? We're talking about energy here. Well, one of the things that you can do when you clean the air, according to ASHRAE 62.1, is that a rule method of 15 CFM per person, which is 30 years old. You can actually do a performance method of determining how much outside air you need to bring in. And if you clean the air, then you don't need to have as much outside air available. A big energy user is outside air, and this is a very important item because it can have a double benefit and is exciting for everybody's health as well. And yes, it does have an impact to clean the air of some very famous viruses also. All right, in this particular project, we took 1,600 tons of air-cooled equipment that was on the roof in big boxes and installed 800 tons of water-cooled variable speed drives, chillers. So Bob, how can you take 1,600 tons of air-cooled equipment and only use 800 tons of water-cooled equipment? Well, it doesn't, the capacity really doesn't have to do with the type of equipment that you're using, water-cooled or air-cooled, but what you've done when you have installed all of these items before that, like 1, 2, and 3, you've reduced the energy in the building, you've reduced the loads in the building in many cases, and as a result, you can greatly undersize the equipment compared to what's there. Some people might say, why did you do that? But there's obvious reasons. It's less cost, it's less energy, and in most cases, it's less space and in the building, and it helps with the project synergies, if you would. And then transformers. You know, we mostly the times early on in energy conservation, we would walk by these, but as we have more electronic equipment like computers and VFDs and anything that's solid state in the building, it makes the alternating current off of a transformer less than perfect. It becomes a little bit choppy, and as a result, what happens is that it throws off heat that is lost in the energy conservation, is lost in the energy that you are reducing, and in the transformers, and also the heat that it throws out less heat and needs less air conditioning. So let's look at the numbers on these. Next slide. I'm sorry. Here's some other items that may get overlooked as well, but they are, because they're not as large in dollar value. But for instance, you can use a walk-in box heat recovery. All of that energy that was in the ice cream or the ice or whatever it was, you can capture that heat to heat domestic hot water. That's used in the BTUs twice, and it's one of the things that runs 24/7, 365. And I was just in a building yesterday where they were still on for the summer. But anyhow, it's another energy user people may not be aware of. And then you optimize kitchen makeup systems. Every kitchen that I've seen that somebody comes in at 7, turns on the fan, it goes off at 3, and that's energy conservation. There's other ways to do it, which are much more sophisticated and now required by ASHRAE 90.1. Tiny domestic hot water recirculating pumps. It's just returning hot water back to the system. You can use a tiny pump instead of the large ones that you've seen many times. Then there's other sequence of operations like the total approach method for heat rejection that are very important, because they're very low cost, but they can be very high in energy conservation. Just why? Because of, I call, intellectual momentum. People have been doing it this way for a long time and never challenged it, but there's a lot that can be saved in just sequences of operation. And then phantom energy is something that's at night, so that we would say, okay, those fans go off at 9 o'clock, but if you stick around till 9:15, they're still running, and they're running all night. And then develop and implement a district-wide energy policy so that everybody understands that the temperature in this room will, by policy, will between 74 and 76 degrees in the summertime. And so no one then can say it's too cold, it's too hot in here. You can go over there with a handheld thermal gun and show this is within our policy. So it has to go to another level to be a credible, credible apology. Next.
Hi, Bob, I don't want to interrupt. I just want to make a note that we're like a couple minutes till 2. So if anyone wants to type a question in the chat, and then if we don't get to answering the questions here, we could do that, have them answered when we send out the email with the link to the recording of the webinar. And just to let you know the time if anyone has a hard stop at 2. And so Bob, why don't you kind of go ahead? and
Okay, yeah, and I can go on, but I won't. Okay. Basically, this is a case study. You can see the ECMs on the bottom, and that's the baseline. Let's just take a look at $890,000, okay, which is the cost of energy at this time, when we first looked at the building. Next. Okay, the energy conservation measures we put in, like we showed, was lighting, VFDs, indoor air quality, and water cooled, is replacing rooftop units, some effective touches, and harmonic transformers. When you got all of those together, you can see the not only did it save, you know, $500,000 in energy. If you look at dollars per foot, we saved over $1 per foot. The site energy utility index, which is kind of like the inverse of Energy Star, was significant savings, and they were able to raise their Energy Star rating from 35 to 99, and also took a huge hunk out of their greenhouse gas, you know, footprint. Next. We put solar on also. We'll talk, you know, we'll just show you the results of that. Next. And this was the final summary, and you can take a look at that at your leisure. But you know, a $6 million project had had payback of 8.1 years. Next. I'm all done.
Well, terrific. We do have a minute or so left. Again, if anyone wants to type a question in the chat. But if not, I want to thank Rachel and Bob so much for speaking today, and thank all of you for attending. And again, we'll send a follow-up email. And thank you for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you. It was our pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
This conference will now be recorded.